Alright, ladies and gentlemen, good morning everybody. I would like to talk about the first theory of the new chapter. The chapter goes about enlargements, and in the first paragraph we're going to talk about how to calculate the volumes of different three-dimensional shapes. And we start with the shape, the prism. And before we start the prism, hopefully you still know all the different shapes of the three-dimensional shapes, like the sphere, like the cuboid, the cone, the pyramid. And today we're gonna talk about the prism. And here you will find some different prism. And before we start how to calculate the volumes, you need to know what is a prism. Now, in the theory in your book, they talk about the base and the top face of the prism and the lateral edges. Now, first of all, what does it mean? What is a base and what is a top face? If we just talk about all those different prisms, let me just talk about the first one. Then we just say that this triangle over here is the base. Now, why? Because at the opposite of my prism, there is exactly the same shape. So if we have a base, here it is exactly the same as the face at the opposite of my shape. So the top face, this shape, that triangle. And so if I push this triangle that way, then you find exactly in the middle another triangle with the same shape. Yeah, so that's one of the reasons that this is a prism. Now let me just talk about the next shape, because in origin it is also a prism. Why? Because if I just say that this is my base, and let it just make a three-dimensional shape of it. If this is my base, then the face at the opposite of it is exactly the same shape. But because this is a square instead of a triangle or an octagon or those kinds of shapes, then we do not talk about a prism anymore, but it is a cuboid or a cube. Yeah, it depends of the size. If this is a rectangle, then it's a cuboid. If this is a square, it is a cube. Yeah, so this one is let me just say it is a cube instead of a prism. Now the shape number 3, over here we will find the base, and there at the opposite of it, and I'm not so good at it, but there you will find exactly the same shape. So if I push this base at the opposite of my prism, then you will find exactly the same shape. So that's your top face. Alright, and exactly the same as figure or shape number 4, 5 and 6, then those, this one, and that one, those are the bases of my pyramid. Yeah? Alright, so what are the lateral edges? Now, if we have our base, and let me just talk about this shape. If we have our base, then those are the lateral edges. So there's just a connection between the base and the top face. Yeah? You can also say that's the height of my prism. Yeah, so if we talk about shape number 2, it wasn't a cube, but you can also say it is a prism because the base and the top face are equal. Then those are the lateral edges, so just the height of my cuboid. Alright, so that's about what is a prism. Now how to calculate the prism. Now for the formula to calculate the prism is the area of the base times the height. Alright, so the area of the base times the height. So very important is that you know what is the base, and of course what is the matching height. Now if we talk about the prism on the left side, then here you will find the base. At the opposite of it you will find the top face. This is the lateral edges or the height of my prism. So to calculate it, we need to calculate first the area of the base, and in this case it is a triangle. Now to calculate the volume, we need to know what is my area of my base. It was a triangle. We need to know the formula to calculate the triangle, and it was a half times the base of my triangle. So in this case it is 8 times the matching height of my triangle, so that's 7. There you go. So this part is already the area of the base. Right now we gonna calculate the height of my prism. Now the height of my prism is 13, because the other line is also 13, even this lateral edges is 13, so multiplying by 13. So the answer here is 364. Now let me just say that the dimensions are all in centimeters, then we talk about cubic centimeters, because we talk about the volume. Yeah. Now if I look at the other shape, it's also a prism, because this is the base, the gray one, there you go, that's the base, and at the top it is exactly the same shape. Alright, they already gave you the area of the base, 105 square centimeters. So to calculate this volume of my prism, we already have the area of the base, 105, and if we multiply it by the height, and be careful, just look always if the units are equal, yeah, so that's centimeters and square centimeters, and that's centimeters, so 105 times 10, and that's 1050 cubic centimeters again. Yeah, so again, to calculate the volume of my prism, we need to do the area of the base, so that's part 1, and then multiplying by the height. Alright, let me just go on with one of the exercises what you find in your book, because here in the next exercise they just say that some prisms are in a cube. Now, what are the properties of a cube? That all the length of my cube are 4, 4, and even this part is 4 centimeters. Yeah. So to calculate the volume of my prism, we need to calculate the area of my base, and then times, of course, the height. Okay, alright, so the area of my base, if we gonna look in my figure, then this, or maybe behind, but I'm just look in front of it, then this part, there you go, that's your base. That's your base. And it is a triangle. And to calculate the area of my triangle, we need to do 1/2 times the base, and this is your base, times the matching height. And the matching height is from this point, and then the perpendicular, there you go, to the bottom line. Now that's exactly the same height as that 4 what you find on the left side. There you go, so that's 4 centimeters. So to calculate the area of the base, we need to do 1/2 times 4 times 4. So then we already have the base, area of the base of my prism. Now, what is the height of my prism? Yeah, of course, that's this one, this part, because that's 4 centimeters. So times times 4. So what is the answer? 2 times 4 times 4, and that's 32 cubic centimeters if all the dimensions are in centimeters. Yeah, so very important that you know the prism is inside the cube. So we know all the dimensions from the cube, 4 centimeters. So in that case, you know the height of my prism. Alright, so that's the first part of paragraph 8.1, how to calculate the volumes. In the next video, we will find how to calculate the volumes of the pyramids and the cones. So, good luck!